Forged in fire, the erased black hands that built the modern world. Before the Industrial Revolution transformed the world, before iron became a symbol of empire, there was fire. And within that fire, in a concealed Jamaican forge, 76 enslaved black metallurgists devised a method that would help spark that very revolution. But their names were erased, their genius was stolen. Their legacy is buried under the name of an Englishman who never struck the spark. This is the story of the forge that built the modern world and the black hands that shaped it. Julian Grant, a renowned black British solicitor, had just arrived home from court. The lingering echoes of the day's trial still weighed on him. Though the verdict had been unmistakable, justice prevailed. His latest case, a prominent corporate discrimination lawsuit, had concluded with a clear victory. Yet another obstacle was removed from his path. He loosened his tie, the silk whispering against his skin, and poured a glass of scotch. The gilded liquid caught the lamplight, glowing like embers in a hearth. Another win, he muttered, raising the glass. Another day, wrestling racism in pinstripes. The apartment felt quiet around him. The city beyond his windows buzzed with distant life, but Julian's world was winding down. He showered, the courtroom still echoing in his mind. He half watched the news, eyes glazed, headlines blurring past. Then retreating to bed, he let the weight of the day sink into the sheets. He didn't know he was carrying more than exhaustion. He switched off the lights, slipped beneath the duvet, and let the darkness claim him. Sleep did not take him gently. It pulled him slowly into a place beneath memory, beneath language, where time folded like hot metal in a smith's hands. The city's sounds, sirens, tires, distant trains, faded into nothing. In their place came older echoes, the hiss of steam, the breath of fire, the weight of iron. A warmth spread through his chest like a hearth rekindled. Then came the rhythm, clang, clang, not the clang of industry, something deeper, measured, sacred. In the dream, Julian's eyes snapped open, and he was no longer in his bed. He stood barefoot in dark soil beneath a night sky dotted with stars, sparks frozen in blackness. The soil was warm underfoot, soft as ashes, solid as time. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, sweat, and molten iron. Before him roared a massive forge. Flames licked the heavens, casting flickering shadows across the earth like ancestral echoes. He knew this place, Jamaica, his homeland. Though years had passed since his feet touched its soil, the memory remained rooted. Around the forge, dark-skinned figures moved with practiced purpose. Their bodies shimmered with sweat, muscles taut from labor. The clang of metal rang out, steady, powerful. From the fire, a man stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his ragged clothes clinging to a frame carved by labor and time. His dark skin gleamed like carved obsidian. His eyes burned with ancestral knowing, two embers glowing with buried memory. His presence was unyielding, eternal. "I am Mingo," the man said, his voice deep and rough like coal beginning to burn. "And I am your forefather." Julian's breath caught. "My forefather. Yes, of St. Thomas. I came to you in fire, so you might see what they tried to erase." Julian's gaze swept the forge, the men working with fluid precision, the tools shaped by scarred hands. "Erase?" he asked softly. "Our legacy, our labor, our genius," Mingo replied. "We forged more than iron. We forged the very engines of empire, but our brilliance was stolen. What we created in bondage was taken and renamed." Mingo stepped closer. Sparks flared around his feet, rising like fireflies. "You've heard of the court process?" Julian nodded slowly. "The iron refining method, British Industrial Revolution, Henry Court." Mingo's eyes narrowed, glowing with restrained fire. Henry Court, a man who thrived on slavery's spoils, a man who took our technique, born in this fire, and passed it off as his own. The process they credit to him, it was ours, created in bondage, owned through agony, sweat, and sacrifice, buried beneath white names. Julian's chest tightened. The weight of it all, his courtroom victory, the truth now rising in his blood, settled over him, like both chain and crown. "We are not ghosts," Mingo said, his voice rising with the forge behind him. "We are the fire. We are the forge." Julian watched, mesmerized, as the grooved rollers turned with hypnotic rhythm. Broken scrap entered, jagged, twisted, discarded, and emerged, transformed, sleek, strong bars of refined iron. These rollers, once forged to crush sugarcane on slave plantations, had been repurposed, reclaimed, redeemed, reborn as revolution. It was alchemy, it was art, it was a resistance cast in steel. "Britain stole more than chains could carry," Mingo said, his voice a low thunder beside Julian. "It stole legacy, and you, my blood, must carry it back into the light. Promise me." Julian swallowed hard, the weight of generations pressing against his voice. He felt the forge's heat at his back, the ache of truth rising in his bones, the weight of a history that had waited for him. "I promise," Julian whispered, "but I need evidence." Mingo's eyes burned brighter. "Then come," he said, turning toward the forge. The world shimmered. The air thickened with heat. The smell of molten iron bloomed around him. Sound warped. Modern noise fell away, replaced by the steady rhythm of hammers and flame. His skin tingled. The ground rolled beneath his feet, steady as a wheel, carried by ancestors unseen. Time folded. Suddenly, Julian was no longer a solicitor. He was a witness, silent, barefoot, bound not by law, but by blood. Morant Bay, Jamaica. The year, 1780. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting bronze light across the valley. Shadows stretched like fingers of history. The forge roared like a living beast. Inside, the air shimmered with heat. Smoke coiled through the rafters. Sparks leapt and spun like spirits freed from silence. Hammers struck with purpose, the rhythm old as fire. Dark-skinned men moved with precision, sweat-slicked, sinewed, powerful. They wore tattered clothes, most barefoot, every step grounded in purpose. Enslaved in name, perhaps, but never in spirit. But here, in flame and form, they were creators, keepers of knowledge, masters of transformation. Devonshire, the master smith, inspected the glowing billet on the anvil. His arms, roped with muscle, moved with seasoned precision. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, never left the metal. "Mingo," he called, "bring the rollers." Mingo stepped forward, lifting the grooved cylinders with care. His fingers, burnished and calloused, bore the memory of countless hours at the hearth. "This method," he said, passing them to Devonshire, "saves time, strengthens iron, but the overseers won't see it. They see metal, not magic." Friday, barely 17, squinted into the fire, his young face carved by flame and focus. He'd once dreamed of teaching letters, not shaping iron, but here, every clang was a lesson, every ember a text. "Captain Jack said those rollers came from the sugar mills," he murmured, "meant to crush cane." A beat passed, then his voice steadier. "Now we use them to crush impurities, turn scrap into strength." He glanced at Mingo. "They said we were chattel, slaves, fit only to cut cane," he said, voice low. "Claimed we were inferior in every way, yet still they depended on us. These men who called themselves our superiors." He paused. "Now we forge what holds their ships together." "That's right, boy. They gave us tools to crush cane. We turned them into tools to shape iron, to build the world." He chuckled, low and knowing. "That's the trick, eh? We bend the tools of their wealth to our will. These rollers, they see machines. But in our hands, their power." Devonshire nodded. "We shaped it into blades, plows, and sacred objects for ceremony. They chained our bodies, but not our minds. A gust of heat surged as the furnace flared. The forge pulsed like the island's heartbeat. Julian's vision sharpened. The clang of hammer to anvil wasn't noise. It was a rhythm, a song of survival and genius buried but unbroken. Kofi, the tongs, Mingo called. Kofi passed them carefully. Easy, son. That's not just ore, that's legacy. I feel it, Mingo said, gripping the metal. It's changing in my hands, speaking, telling me what it wants to become. Julian felt a chill, even in the heart of the forge. This was it, the moment, the passing of genius from hand to hand, flame to flame. The true birth of the so-called court process had happened here, not in English mills, but in sweat, in brilliance, in bondage. Captain Jack leaned on his hammer, grinning through soot. That's the spirit, boy. Iron carries stories. You bend it wrong, it remembers. Orange and gold shimmered across stone and skin. The men moved like dancers in a sacred rite, fluid, precise, unstoppable. Devonshire, the anchor. Friday, the youngest spark. George and Jemmy, striking in perfect rhythm. Jackson laughing loud enough to startle birds and small children. Will silent and exact. Bob reading heat like scripture. Guy spinning tales mid-swing. Matt humming a tune older than Empire. Kwasi, volcanic. Each strikes a sermon. 76 men, 76 minds. 76 masters of flame of vision, of buried genius. Some were born in Jamaica. Others were kidnapped and shipped from West and Central Africa, surviving the dreaded Middle Passage, carrying with them the knowledge of fire, metal, and the memory of their villages, families, kin, and ancestors. Not merely slaves, engineers, artisans, carriers of fire, in bondage, yes, but builders of revolution. Near the open doorway stood John Reeder, the plantation owner, stiff, overdressed, sweating through silk. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The men barely looked his way. He was a shadow in a temple he could not name. Weeks earlier, he had written to a cousin in Surrey, "I know nothing of ironwork, but my slaves excel at every part of it. Perfect and invisible." Julian stood at the threshold between memory and fire. The veil lifted. Truth came into focus, not myth, memory. At the heart of the forge, Kofi adjusted the grooved roller, once built to crush cane, now reborn to shape iron. Kwasi didn't look up. It presses more than sugar, master. That roller presses life back into dead iron. Matt stepped forward, a glowing scrap held in tongs. Watch. The room still. He fed the iron into the rollers. The machine groaned. Sparks flared, brief stars against the dark. The bar emerged, straight, strong, transformed. Captain Jack nodded. Iron's got memory. Treat it right, and it remembers what it can be. Devonshire lifted the bar, inspecting it with reverence. Cleaner grain, fewer flaws, the strength of 2 hands, and the wisdom of 100 years. Julian's chest tightened. This was not just metallurgy. This was memory forged into strength, resistance turned legacy. These men were not shadows in someone else's history. They were the architects of the very empire that denied their names. Visionaries, scientists in chains, artisans whose stolen brilliance powered an industrial revolution. Julian felt it in his bones. This wasn't just history, it was inheritance. They weren't just restoring iron, they were restoring dignity, restoring legacy. The roller was more than a tool, it was a symbol. It turned what the world discarded into something unbreakable. The forge wasn't just industry, it was rebellion. Guy, ever the storyteller, stepped close and murmured, "That bar, that's all of us. Bent, burned, but not broken." Behind them, Reeder cleared his throat, but he said nothing. He didn't understand what he was witnessing, not truly. He saw process, not purpose, labor, not genius. But Julian did. And as the heat of the forge roared in his ears, he understood the world would not remember unless someone made it. This was not a dream. It was a calling. The iron screamed as it passed through the rollers, glowing red-hot and defiant. Sparks burst like fireflies into the dusk. On the other side, the bar emerged, flatter, stronger, truer, its impurities cast aside. Again and again, they fed it through, deliberate, unhurried. With each pass, the glow dimmed, but the metal's integrity grew. It was like coaxing truth from fire, like drawing soul from ore. A mechanical alchemy, Mingo murmured, eyes lit by flame. Nearby, a teenage boy watched in reverent silence. His limbs were lean with youth, his hands already calloused by apprenticeship. He bore his father's name, Mingo, a name passed like iron itself, through flame, through memory, through generations. Around them, the forge pulsed into the night, its orange heart beating strong against the darkening Caribbean sky. Smoke curled into constellations above. The men worked and joked, sharing stories from lands now spoken of like fables. Lands they'd been stolen from, but never truly left. Kofi stood at the edge of the forge, his voice soft, the rhythm of memory threading through each word. My village was near Lake Bosumtwi, he said, in the Ashanti region of Kumasi. My father led the forge there. Not just a smith, he was teacher, healer, keeper of the fire. He paused, eyes lost in flame. We did not call it ironworking. We called it spirit calling. We called it creation. The others nodded, silently honoring the truth in his words. To shape iron was not just skill. It was communion, a sacred dialogue between the seen and the unseen. Water hissed as it met hot metal, steam rising like the breath of gods. The shadows of men danced in the forge light, as if the ancestors had returned to witness what colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade had tried to erase. They were not just slaves. They were engineers. They were chemists. They were philosophers of fire, poets of heat and pressure, innovators, not imitators. The younger Mingo, still watching, asked quietly, "Do you think they know?" Kofi turned. "Who?" "The people in England. Do you think they know who truly makes their empire strong, who raises their cities?" A long silence followed. Kofi's face didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It simply held the weight of truth. "No," he said finally. "They do not know." A pause. "And they do not want to." He looked toward the boy, voice steady, as the forge behind him flared with renewed fire. But that does not change the truth. John Reeder sat at a cluttered desk, flipping through letters with a furrowed brow. His clerk, nervously shuffling papers, watched him. "Master Reeder," said Tom, the overseer, his voice low but urgent. "The foundry is making more profit than ever. The metallurgists, these slaves, are experts beyond any I've seen. No white forge could match them." Reeder exhaled, wig askew in the tropical heat. Sweat beaded on his brow, despite the evening breeze drifting through the plantation office. "I know nothing of iron making, Tom," he muttered. "Not a damn thing. But those Negroes, they're perfect in every branch. It's their skill that fuels this place." He paused, glancing toward the forge's faint glow in the distance, its fire still burning long after sundown. "Still," Reeder added darkly, "I fear what the colonial authorities might say if they learn how powerful this foundry has become, how independent it is. That kind of excellence in the hands of slaves frightens them." Tom said nothing. He didn't need to. Fear hung in the air like coal smoke. Portsmouth, England, late 1781. Cold air clung to soot-stained windows. Thousands of miles from the heat of Morant Bay, Henry Court sat hunched over a desk strewn with failed blueprints. Ledgers lay open like wounds. Debts, failures. His dream of revolutionizing iron refining was dying on paper. The Royal Navy had once promised contracts, but poor scrap quality, inefficient processes, and inconsistent output had cost him everything but shame. Blueprints littered the floor, ink-streaked, smudged by disappointment. The air reeked of rust and cold ambition. Then rap, a knock, a letter arrived, sealed in wax. From Cousin Edward in Jamaica, Court muttered, breaking it open with shaking fingers. His eyes scanned the page. A forge near Morant Bay, operated by Negroes under a man named Reader. They make something astonishing from scrap iron, the roller technique, unlike anything seen before. Precise, efficient, nearly flawless. Court reread the letter. His hands trembled, not with awe, but confusion. Negro metallurgists, rollers, precision. He stood abruptly, pacing. How? How could they? For a moment, doubt cracked through his pride, but only for a moment. It doesn't matter, he muttered. No one will believe it anyway. He dipped his pen in ink. The diagrams would be redrawn under his name. Court's hands froze, then trembled. He stood abruptly, pacing, heart pounding louder than any forge. If this is true, he whispered. If this works. His voice caught in his throat. I could save the business. I could save my name. He didn't ask who had invented it. He didn't wonder whose hand shaped the fire. He didn't care. Back in Morant Bay, the forge roared, unaware that its brilliance had already begun to cast a shadow in another man's name. The metal still sang as it passed through the rollers. Sparks still danced into the night air like fire-born spirits. The men laughed, worked, told stories. In the glow of the forge, they didn't yet know they had already been betrayed. And in Julian's dream, the truth solidified. Betrayal not just of people, but of legacy. Thousands of miles away, in a dim room in Portsmouth, Henry Court bent low under candlelight. His fingers moved feverishly across fresh sketches, drawings of rollers, crucibles, and refining sequences. Details sent from Jamaica, stolen details. The diagrams were descriptively simple, brilliant, efficient, transformative. He studied them with a mixture of awe and envy. He couldn't fathom how such innovation had bloomed in the colonies, how men deemed uncivilized, inferior, and enslaved could outperform the trained engineers of the British mainland. The answer didn't matter to him. Only the opportunity did. Within weeks, Court had lobbied the Admiralty. His letters warned of potential insurrection, rebel forges, and enslaved black metallurgists arming themselves with industrial knowledge. His prose pulsed with imperial anxiety, but it was a lie. His real aim was clear: to seize what had been forged in the drudgery of the plantation by enslaved hands and rebrand it under his own English name. He met behind closed doors with Navy officers and London financiers. Imagine, he said, voice low and urgent, turning worthless scrap into strong iron in half the time. A process like this, in the hands of slaves, it could destabilize the island. They could arm themselves, perhaps even revolt. He leaned in closer, the fire of ambition behind his eyes. We must act quickly, before the knowledge spreads. It was enough. The order was given. A military expedition, cloaked as a precautionary security mission, was dispatched to Jamaica, not to protect the colony, but to seize a secret, to erase a legacy, to ensure that what was forged in fire would never bear the names of its true creators. Morant Bay, late 1781. The forge was silent. Where once fire roared and iron sang, only smoldering ash remained. Days earlier, British soldiers had descended under the pretense of quelling rebellion. They stormed the foundry with muskets drawn and orders unsigned, shouting of danger, whispering of fear. They took what they could not understand. The 76 men, the masters of metal, were scattered like sparks in the wind. Some were arrested. Others disappeared into distant plantations, forbidden from ever forging again. Their names, their tools, their knowledge, fractured, fragmented, silenced, but not erased, not completely. At dusk, Mingo returned. He walked slowly among the blackened ruins. The stone walls stood scorched, the forge cold, the rollers twisted and half buried beneath rubble. Smoke still lingered in the air, faint and bitter. His son followed close behind, struggling to speak past the lump in his throat. "They took it all," the boy whispered. Mingo shook his head. "Not all," he said softly. "They don't know the fire lives in us." The boy stared at the ground, fists clenched. "Why did they shut it down, Papa?" "We made iron, not weapons." "They feared what we could build," Mingo replied. He looked out at the blackened forge, his voice low and sure. "Not just iron, but a future." Then silently, he knelt by a mound of stones near the forge's edge. He brushed away ash, dirt, and char until he uncovered a flat slab of wood. Beneath it, hidden in a shallow pit, lay a scroll, wrapped in oilskin and bound with twine. Mingo pulled it free. It was the drawing of the roller system, lines etched by firelight, ink drawn by stolen time, a record of invention, of defiance, of brilliance. He tucked it into his shirt, near his heart. "One day," he whispered, "we will teach the truth." He rose and turned to leave, then paused. "Remember this place," he said to the boy. "When you grow, tell your children. Tell them what we made here. Our hands made iron walk. Our minds gave it strength." The boy nodded, silent and solemn. Behind them, the forge sat in darkness, but beneath the stone and ash, in the belly of the earth, the embers still glowed, faint but alive, waiting. The machinery arrived quietly, created under tarps, marked as colonial salvage. The components from Morant Bay were shipped across the sea, stolen from flame, stripped of origin, divorced from the hands that made them. Thousands of miles from the ruins of Morant Bay, under chandeliers and powdered wigs, Henry Court stood in polished shoes before the Royal Society. In his hand, diagrams drawn from fire he never touched. "Gentlemen," he began. "And with my innovation," Court declared, gesturing to the blueprints beside him, "we can now process scrap iron faster than ever before. The groove roller system will transform Britain's industrial capability. No more waste, no more inefficiency." Applause followed like thunder, loud enough to drown the silence of the 76. Later, the Times would call Henry Court the father of the iron trade. His name would be etched into textbooks. Streets would bear his surname. Statues would rise in towns he never built. His name, Court, would be carved into plaques, into steel, into the very foundation of British industrial pride. But the truth? History had been whitewashed, the truth rewritten in the ink of erasure, in the shadows of a crumbling sugar mill. Once a place of profit, now a sanctuary of memory. Dust floated like ash through beams of fading light. On an old table lay pages, brittle with age, but alive with truth. Names once buried now shone like stars rising from forgotten constellations. Devonshire, Captain Jack, Friday, Kofi, Kwasi, Mingo. Their names, once stamped out, now returned in ink and breath. "These men," Mingo said, his voice steady, standing before the rusted gears of empire. "They stole our innovation, the very spark that made Britain an iron giant." He let the words hang. "Our innovation was not peripheral," Friday added. "It was the core, the iron spine in the making of the modern world. But history erased us," Mingo continued. "This wasn't knowledge shared. This was theft. Theft enforced with violence and veiled in the language of empire." From the back of the mill, a woman raised her hand, her voice uncertain but brave. "Do you think this truth matters now?" Captain Jack looked up slowly. "Yes," he said, "because justice begins with truth. And without our truth, the foundations of the modern world stand on lies." Kofi stepped forward. His voice was clear. He spoke the names aloud like a liturgy. "We bore enslavement's weight, yet we built through torment. We were the fire." Kwasi closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the forge again, not dimmed by chains, not silenced by fear, but blazing in honor, in freedom, in truth. Our knowledge crossed oceans, Devonshire said. Even in chains, it moved. Our genius endured the slave trade, outlived oppression, and defied silence. Friday clenched his fists. Our stories were buried, our voices silenced, but one day, he looked out past the mill's crumbling archway, as if seeing time bend forward. One day, the world will remember. Devonshire's voice rumbled, quiet but immovable. They destroy what we build, because they fear our strength, but they cannot destroy our spirit. Mingo turned to Julian, his descendant. Now, he said, you know our story. Gather the evidence. Fight for our truth. He placed a hand on the rusted remains of the roller system. The forge never died. It was only hidden. He looked up. His voice was flame. And now it shall speak. Keep your promise. The clang of hammers faded, replaced by the hum of his bathroom fan extractor. Julian jolted upright, breath shallow, duvet damp with sweat. The clock read 4:17 a.m. The dream still clung to him, heat in his chest, soot in his lungs. He stumbled to his desk and opened his laptop. Mingo, Morant B., Henry Court. The screen lit up. Article after article. Then one caught Julian's eye. A paper by Dr. Jenny Bulstrode, University College London, Forged in Fire, the erased black hands that built the modern world. Chills crept across his skin. The names matched the dream: Mingo, Captain Jack, Kofi, Grooved Rollers, a white enslaver named Rita, Court's bankruptcy, the military raid, the theft. The Jamaican foundry had indeed developed a breakthrough in wrought iron. Henry Court didn't invent the process. He seized it after the British military shut down the forge, fearing rebellion. Julian leaned back, breath caught. It wasn't a dream. It's our stolen truth. He remembered a professor once claiming, Britain built progress because it was in their blood. Julian had nodded then, silent, unknowing. Now, he saw clearly. They taught us we came from the wind, he whispered, but we came from fire. He flew to Jamaica, searched archives, found the names Mingo, Friday Captain Jack, alongside Reader's admission. They are perfect in every branch of the iron manufactory. Back in England, he followed the trail, Court's cousin, the military orders, the patent. Every document a quiet monument to erasure. The court process, the method that powered Britain's iron empire, had been created by 76 enslaved black metallurgists in Jamaica. Their work built Crystal Palace, Kew Gardens, and St. Pancras Station. Julian gathered their names, traced the theft, documented their genius. He spoke at universities, met with MPs, petitioned museums. On national television, he declared, the Industrial Revolution was forged, in part, by enslaved African engineers. Their brilliance was stolen by empire. He called for the court process to be renamed the Morant Method and demanded plaques, memorials, and curriculum reform. The movement grew, igniting a call to reclaim the forge, restore black history, and demand justice in innovation. Museums updated exhibitions. One became permanent, forged in fire, black hands that built the modern world, etched at its entrance. We forge more than iron. We forge progress. Mingo. At the opening, Julian stood beneath the names of his ancestors, lit by steel and glass. The stolen flame had been returned. That night, he placed a candle on his window ledge. Rest now, Mingo, he whispered. The world remembers. And far beyond time, in a forge that never truly died, the hammers rang again. The rediscovery of the contributions made by enslaved black metallurgists in 18th century Jamaica challenges dominant narratives of the Industrial Revolution and alters our understanding of global technological history. Figures such as Mingo, Kofi, Kwasi, Devonshire, and others were not merely laborers. They were skilled engineers, innovators, and custodians of knowledge from African ironworking traditions that existed before European industrialization. The misattribution of their work to Henry Court, a man who gained their innovation through colonial violence and systemic erasure, illustrates how empire influenced not only economies, but also ways of knowing. The legacy of industrial progress, often portrayed as a triumph of European ingenuity, is therefore intertwined with the histories of colonial extraction and intellectual theft. Reclaiming the stories of the Morant Bay Forge does not merely restore individual names to history. It reclaims a fuller truth. It compels historians, educators, and institutions to interrogate the silences in the archive and the mechanisms of erasure embedded in the narratives we inherit. This case highlights a wider need, that the decolonization of history involves not just inclusion, but correction, a reassertion of erased contributions that shape the modern world. It affirms that justice in historical memory begins with acknowledgement, and that restoring truth is an act of scholarly and cultural repair itself. If you enjoyed this story, show some love, like, comment, and subscribe to Word, Sound, and Story, where Troy McKenzie transforms real-life experiences into meaningful, dramatic, and entertaining tales. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Bless up.